Hello and welcome back to the ITIL Practitioner. My name is Dr. Suzanne Van Hove and I will be your instructor. So in Module 2, this is really the introductory information for that ITIL Practitioner, and it's heavy in terms. For this module to make the most sense, you need to have read Chapter 1 in the ITIL Practitioner Guidance Volume. The first set of terms that we need to talk about is adopt and adapt. And this should not be a phrase that is unfamiliar to you. You should have heard it in your foundation class, and you definitely should have heard it if you've had any of the intermediates. This is an important concept that we are very, very clear on when we talk about service management. One of my pet peeves, and I have a few, but one of the ones that just drives me absolutely up the wall is when I hear organizations say, oh, I'm going to implement ITIL, or we're deploying ITIL, or something along that line. First of all, ITIL is a set of books. It's very hard to implement a book. You can't certainly deploy a book. And so it's kind of inaccurate. So in reality, the word implement and deploy is not at all appropriate. It is adopt and adapt. So what exactly does that mean? So when we adopt something, we're showing that we have a level of commitment. And in this case, we're committed to having a service orientation. And quite frankly, it's not just the IT shop that should have a service orientation. It's the business as well. It's the entire organization. That service orientation says we have a focus on the customer, that we want to understand the customer and ensure that the services and or products that we're delivering meets their needs. So we're going to adopt that attitude. Okay, so adapt then says, all right, I'm going to understand what the guidance is telling me and then apply it to the organizational needs, goals, and objectives. So that means is that I'm going to review that information and say, does it apply to me? Does it apply to my organization? Will it benefit my business? Remember that it is a framework, that ITIL is a framework, which means there's a number of concepts in there, and any organization could not possibly deploy, adopt, and adapt all of them. So what we want to do is understand those best practices, modify them to fit my environment, the culture, making sure that they're going to augment the goals and objectives of the organization and put those into play. So we're going to adopt and adapt this information. That's a very key phrase. It is very testable. Be sure that you understand those two concepts. The next set of concepts is really a set of terms, most of which you have had at the foundation level, but we're going to review all 5. So we have service, service provider, customer. You should know what those are already. We also have the concept of value, which you certainly should know, and a new concept of a value network. So let's just go ahead and jump right into those. All right, so the first term is service. The definition is written for you there on the slide. You should remember it from your foundation class. It's a means of delivering value to customers by facilitating outcomes customers want to achieve without the ownership of specific costs and risks. Well, what does that mean? Well, again, from your foundation training, you should understand that we define services by understanding what the needs of the customer are. We develop those services to meet those needs, and as the service provider, we take on the cost and the risk of delivering that service. So when we think about this, it's IT in support of some business function. So IT in support of corporate finance, IT in support of sales and marketing. And you think about the technologies that are behind corporate finance, that we could have a financial application. We have the servers, the network, the data, the storage, the directory services, the other components that will be put together to allow the business to use the functionality, and it meets the corporate goals and objectives. At the same time, as the service provider, we've incurred the costs and we've said that we would deliver that service so that the user of the service doesn't have to think about the legal, the regulatory, or mandatory rules and regulations that need to be in place. Think about HIPAA and the Patient Privacy Act in the healthcare environment. Doctors don't want to think about HIPAA rules, they want to practice medicine. So the service providers in the hospitals or in the medical fields have taken on the costs and the risks to deliver functionality so that the doctor just can perform and practice medicine and not think about the requirements from the regulators. Okay, there's a service. The next term is a service provider. Well, I've used that term already in defining a service, but a service provider is an organization supplying services to one or more internal or external customers. From your foundation class, you would remember that there are 3 service provider types, a type 1, type 2, and type 3. Type 1 is that internal service provider, type 2 is the shared services unit, and type 3 is the external service provider. Do you have to know those 3 types for this course? No, not really, but it is good to remember that there are different types of service providers. Most likely your organization is all 3, or perhaps only a type 1 and a type 2, depending on what your organization is. Okay? So then finally the last term here is customer. Well, a customer is someone who buys goods or services. They do that on the behalf of the user, so there's another term for you. The customer of an IT service provider is the person or a group who defines and agrees a service level target. That's an important phrase. Service level targets. They're telling us the performance parameters that they require. So that customer is a senior manager who has the authority and the budget to purchase a service, and that purchase is in air quotes. Okay, so they are going to engage the service provider. We're going to discuss the requirements, why we need this to meet business goals and objectives, and then design, develop, deliver, and support that service to the benefit of that customer. You remember value from your foundation class as 2 components, utility and warranty. Utility, fit for purpose, warranty, fit for use. Those terms still are in play in this course. So remembering that fit for use is that we've met the requirements or we've mitigated constraints. Warranty says it's the guarantee that the service is going to have enough availability, capacity, continuity, and security requirements or functionality to meet the needs of the organization. Both utility and warranty must be present to deliver value. The last term is value network. And this is a little bit different, but it's pretty much self-explanatory. This value network is a complex set of relationships between 2 or more groups or organizations. Value is generated through the exchange of knowledge, information, goods, or services. So a value network is taking or extending the value chain and saying there's always more than one input or more than one output in a service. So we could have multiple service providers coming together with functionality, joined at one service provider and delivering to multiple customers who may also be delivering to multiple customers. But understand it is a relationship between 2 or more groups of organizations to generate a more efficient, effective service. Okay? So there we go. There's our 5 key terms, and we're going to continue down this term list here as we look at the next section. Okay, the terms effective and efficient. These are pervasive terms throughout service management, and you really have to have a good handle on them. First of all, effective. This is the graphic on the left. It's saying that what we've delivered has delivered value to the customer. So the little red man here going towards that finish line, he's in front of everybody else. What he has delivered or will be delivering meets the needs of the customer, meets the needs of the organization, and it allows the organization to meet their business goals and objectives. So it provides value. So effectiveness is value driven. Efficiency, on the other hand, and this is the graphic on the right, is a balance. So it's that cost-value relationship. So what we've invested into a service delivery balances with the value gained. Okay, so we want to look at the level of efficiency. So we don't want to spend a lot and get a little in return. That's very inefficient. So that we're balancing the resources appropriately. And those resources could be just financial capital. It could be our staff. It could be our hardware, applications, whatever it might be. But they have to balance in the order that we're using, that we get the necessary return. So that's that cost-value relationship. Okay, so that's effective and efficient. All right, the next set of terms, the ITIL Practitioner guidance has made it into an acronym, VOCR. These 4 terms, value, outcome, costs, and risks, are an important set of terms that need to be applied as you work as a consultant. We should apply it to the delivery of service. We should apply it to how we go about and create or manage process. But these are 4 good terms to keep in mind as we work as a service management consultant. So let's look at each of these individually. First of all, value we know. Value is the utility and warranty, and it's really about how that service, product, or partner is going to help deliver value to the customer. So we really need to keep that to the forefront. Again, fit for use, fit for purpose. The next term is outcomes, and a lot of times people confuse outcomes with outputs. Now, outcomes are the specific outcomes or the results of carrying out an activity, both the intended and the actual outcomes. So the example that they provide in the ITIL Practitioner guidance is around a wedding. You know, you want to plan the wedding to be the experience of a lifetime. The outputs of doing that activity is maybe engaging the various services that will allow that wedding to go off. So those are the outputs. I've always used the analogy of somebody building a piece of furniture. And they realize that to build this piece of furniture, they need to use 3/4 inch bolts. Well, to use a 3/4 inch bolt, you need a 3/4 inch hole. Well, he doesn't have a drill bit, so he goes to the hardware store, or she goes to the hardware store and buys the drill bit. That is an output. He's not really buying the drill bit. He wants what the drill bit provides, which is the 3/4 inch hole, so he can have that new piece of furniture. Outcomes, outputs. The next one is costs. Well, costs are what the true and complete cost of delivering that service. So it's the amount of money spent on a specific activity or a service. It can take into account depreciation. It can be portrayed as notional cost. So we tell the customer exactly what the service does cost, but we don't expect to be paid for it. But it's really the cost of achieving the outcomes that are desired. And the last term is risk. This is a term that's carried over from the foundation, and the risk is a possible event that could cause harm or loss or affect the ability to achieve the objectives. So you need to always think about, when we talk about services or the processes that we're supporting or designing, what are the possible risks? And if those risks do materialize, what could they endanger the achievement of the outcomes that are desired? One other side note on risk: realize that a risk can be both positive and negative. So the best questions, especially with risk for me, what's the risk of doing? What's the risk if we don't do? Sometimes it's more telling to ask the opposite of what you're intending to find out. So what's the risk of doing something? You may say, oh, not much. Well, then what's the risk if we don't do? That may have a lot more information and a lot more pertinent information for the organization to understand. So there's your 4 terms: value, outcome, costs, and risks. So that VOCR concept needs to underpin all of the activities that you're doing during this practitioner class, and is also in real life. All right, the last set of terms, some of them should be familiar to you already. For example, service management. You should have remembered this from your foundation class. A set of specialized organizational capabilities for providing value to customers in the form of services. Lovely. That is the standard definition. We shouldn't have any problem with that. But we now have a secondary definition, because when we think about it, we may have multiple providers that need to be managed. as we deliver services. Very rarely will you find a service provider have 100% of the capability to deliver a complete service. There's a new framework out, it's called SIAM, which is Service Integration and Management, and it's about the capabilities and set of practices that will enable an organization to manage multiple service providers consistently and efficiently so that the goods and services that are provided meets customer needs. Now, this is interesting because it's pretty much of an operationalization of that value network. How do you make sure that you manage all the various suppliers in that supply chain? So SIAM has its own set of principles, it's its own framework, and it's well worth looking at. The next term is IT Service Management, something that you should also be familiar with from the foundation class. It's the implementation and management of quality IT services that meets the needs of the business. And IT Service Management is performed by an IT service provider through an appropriate mix of people, process, and technology. Three of the terms here, hey, we get into a little bit of minutia with the IT piece. Remember that service management needs to be pervasive across an organization, but we all know that what is a service, what's provided by a service, is typically delivered via an IT organization. So let's just keep those two terms and the benefits of SIAM in the background. Now, the last couple of pieces here is that we need to talk about the various delivery models that we might have. We need to think a little bit about the technology. So, how are we going to exploit technology so that we do have an efficient delivery and that we can also manage the technical components? So we need to have that basis understood. We also need to understand the role of the service provider in that we want a holistic management of value-based services. So the service provider has a relationship with the customer that we're providing services to meet customer needs, not the other way around, that IT is delivering a set of functionality and telling the customer, good luck. We want to have the relationship as transparent as possible, but also the customer is driving the relationship because they're providing us the requirements. Okay, so that is the set of terms that we need to discuss for the first module, but it's time to get busy. Remember that this class is 80% doing. So I have 3 exercises to assign. Now, if you have the student guide, these exercises are written out for you there. I'm also going to show them to you on the slides. So let's go through and I'm going to tell you what I expect on each of these exercises as we go through. At that point, you should stop all the recordings and buckle down and complete the activities, then come back and we'll discuss a possible solution. All right, exercise number 1. Again, we're using CruiseAlong cars, so go out and make sure that you've downloaded the scenario booklet. You just need the first 2 pages of this, the core information. And so asking you to read that full scenario booklet. And then I want you to create a relationship diagram. I want you to go through that and analyze that case study and figure out who exactly is doing what to whom. So there's multiple organizations, and you're going to need to show the relationship, what they're good at, what they're providing, what they're doing. So create a relationship diagram. To help you out, in the ITIL Practitioner Guidance Volume 744 and 745, there are 2 templates there, a sponsor diagram and a roadmap. They may help you out in creating that diagram. Secondly, also create a stakeholder analysis. So once you've created that diagram, I'm hoping that you note that there's various roles that have been specifically mentioned. So jot down those roles. What are they doing? What are their responsibilities? Who do they connect to? Those types of things. So create that stakeholder analysis. For more information, use the template in the back of the book in section 741. Exercise number 2. This is CruiseAlong Cars Services. So you've created the relationships, and by the way, that relationship map may change the longer you work within CruiseAlong Cars, and that's perfectly well and good. So with the CruiseAlong Cars Services exercise, what services have been described or what services can be presumed? kind of like you to make, or would like you to make, a service map. Now, there is no such thing of a service map in the back of the book, but what you want to do is to have a high-level mapping and consider the following things. These are things that you would consider in real life. Who are the customers for the services? What's the value proposition for each service? What are the outcomes that are expected? And what are the various costs and risks for each service? So this could be a very nice little table. Okay? So consider how you're going to create that map. I'm going to assume that you may struggle with this for a little bit, but fair enough. It's a good exercise. But consider the questions that I've just asked. Who are the customers? What outcomes are expected? What's the value proposition of the service? And what about the costs and the risks? Exercise 3, again, I want you to do all 3, read the full scenario booklet, and now generate another list. What are the issues that are currently in the CruiseAlong Cars enterprise? You can use that relationship diagram that you developed in the first exercise to help you to consider or think about what are some of the current issues. I want you to create a full description and list the organizations that are impacted as well as the proposed resolution, if it is known. So again, you're going to create a table. But think about what are the current issues, who's involved, and also the impact to the organization. Now, the last activity that you have here is that at this point in time, you actually could break into those sample exams. I am only assigning specific questions using sample exam 1. I am not going to assign any questions in sample exam 2. I will let you use that as a full practice exam. Look at it when you're ready. Based on the information that we've discussed in this module, you can answer 4 questions. You can answer questions 1, 2, 29, and 30 in sample exam 1. Now, remember that these are case study based, and these sample questions may look at different sections of the additional information. So be smart as you're answering these questions that you have the full amount of information that's necessary. Once you've answered them, obviously review your answer and use those justifications. Anything that you've answered incorrectly, look it up. Go back and review the information in the ITIL Practitioner guidance. Review this video if it would help you understand different concepts. But make sure that you engage and learn and force yourself to go back and review these questions. Even if you got them right, it's well worth rereading the information, especially if you did not read the full chapter to begin this video. That's it for this module. Well, I'll see you in the next module where we will review possible answers for the 3 exercises.